In the spring of 1212, children began to disappear from their homes across Europe. They were not stolen. They were not lost. They simply walked away. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. They left their mothers crying in doorways. They left their fathers standing in empty fields. They walked away from everything they knew, following a dream that would destroy them all. This is the story of the Children's Crusade. A moment in history so strange, so terrible, that even now we struggle to believe it happened. But it did happen. And what became of those children remains one of the darkest chapters ever written in the long and bloody book of human suffering. The world in 1212 was not our world. It was a time of dirt roads and stone walls. A time when most people never traveled more than 10 miles from where they were born. A time when the church held more power than kings. And the church had a problem. For over 100 years, Christian armies had fought to control Jerusalem. They called these wars the Crusades. Holy wars. God's wars. Thousands of knights had sailed across the sea to fight in the desert. Many had died. Some had won great battles. But Jerusalem, the city they all wanted, kept slipping from their hands. The Pope called for more crusades. Kings sent more armies. But nothing seemed to work. The Holy Land remained just out of reach, like a dream that fades when you try to hold it. Then, something changed. Not in the halls of power. Not in the planning rooms of generals. But in the streets and villages where ordinary people lived. A new idea began to spread. A whisper that moved from town to town, like wind through wheat fields. The adults had failed, the whisper said. The knights were too sinful. The kings were too greedy. God would not grant them victory because their hearts were not pure. But children, the whisper continued, children were innocent. Children were blessed. If children marched to Jerusalem, God would open the sea before them. The walls would fall. Victory would come without a single sword being raised. This idea should have died as quickly as it appeared. Adults should have laughed it away. But they did not. Because in that spring of 1212, something impossible happened. A boy appeared in France. His name was Stephen. He was a shepherd, perhaps 12 years old, perhaps younger. He came from a village so small that history has forgotten its name. But Stephen claimed that Christ himself had appeared to him in the fields where he watched his sheep. Christ had given him a letter. Christ had given him a mission. He was to gather the children of France and lead them to Jerusalem. Stephen began to preach. His words were simple, but they burned with certainty. He spoke in village squares. He spoke at crossroads. He spoke at market days. And children listened. At first it was a few, then dozens, then hundreds. They came from farms and workshops. They came from rich families and poor ones. Some were as young as 6 or 7. Others were teenagers on the edge of adulthood. They gathered around this shepherd boy as if he carried light inside him. Their parents tried to stop them. Mothers locked doors. Fathers shouted warnings. But the children would not listen. Some climbed out of windows in the night. Some simply walked past their parents as if they could not hear them anymore. The pull was too strong. The promise was too bright. Stephen led them south toward the sea. Behind him, the column of children grew longer each day. They sang as they walked. They prayed. They believed with all the fierce certainty that only the young can possess, that God would part the waters for them just as he had for Moses. At the same time, across the border in the German lands, another movement began. Another boy, this one named Nicholas, made the same claims. Christ had spoken to him. The children would succeed where adults had failed. God was on their side. Nicholas gathered his own army of children. They came from the towns along the Rhine. They came from mountain villages and river valleys. They marched south through the Alps, heading for Italy and the sea beyond. 2 great columns of children. 2 separate movements. Both believing the same impossible thing. Both walking toward the same terrible fate. The adults who watched them pass did not know what to do. Some joined the march, hoping to protect the children, or perhaps swept up in the same fever. Some threw food to them as they passed, blessing them, calling them holy. Others stood silent, sensing that something was deeply wrong but unable to name it. Monks wrote about the marches in their books. They called it a miracle. They called it a sign from God. They did not call it what it was: a tragedy, unfolding in slow motion under the summer sun. Stephen's group reached the port city of Marseille on the southern coast of France. Thousands of children arrived at the harbor, dusty and tired and burning with faith. They stood at the edge of the water and waited for God to act. They prayed for the sea to open. They sang hymns until their voices cracked. They waited through the heat of the day and into the cool of evening. The sea did not part. The waters did not roll back. God did not answer. The children stood there for days. Their food ran out. Their certainty began to crack. Some started to cry. Others sat in silence, staring at the waves that refused to obey their prayers. The adults of the city watched from a distance, not knowing whether to feel pity or shame. Then, two merchants came forward. Their names were Hugh the Iron and William the Pig. They offered to help. They said they would provide ships. They would take the children across the sea to the Holy Land, asking nothing in return. It would be their gift to God. The children boarded the ships, 7 vessels in total. Thousands of young souls packed into wooden hulls. They sailed out of the harbor singing. The people on shore could hear their voices carrying across the water, until distance swallowed the sound. Those ships never reached Jerusalem. For 18 years, no one knew what happened to them. The children simply vanished into the blue emptiness of the Mediterranean Sea. Their parents waited for word that never came. Whole villages lost their young. The silence was absolute. Then, nearly 2 decades later, a priest returned to France. He had been on one of the ships. He was one of the few who survived to tell the story. And the story he told was worse than anyone had imagined. 2 of the ships had sunk in a storm off the island of Sardinia. All aboard had drowned. The remaining 5 ships did not sail to Jerusalem. They sailed to ports in North Africa, to slave markets. The merchants Hugh and William had planned this from the beginning. They had sold the children to Muslim traders. Thousands of them, scattered across the markets of Tunis and Alexandria and beyond. Some were bought as servants, some as laborers. Young girls disappeared into harems. Young boys into brutal work that ground them down until there was nothing left. A few, the priest said, were purchased by the governor of Egypt. They vanished into palace walls and were never heard from again. The children who had believed God would open the sea for them were sold like cattle. Their faith had delivered them straight into chains. The German children under Nicholas faced a different horror, but horror nonetheless. They crossed the Alps on foot. The mountain passes were steep and cold even in summer. Many of the younger children could not make the journey. They collapsed on the trails. They froze in the high places where snow never melts. Their bodies were left behind, impossible to bury in the frozen ground. Those who survived the mountains reached the cities of northern Italy. But Italy did not welcome them. The cities closed their gates. The children were seen as beggars, as a plague of locusts eating through food stores and spreading disease. Guards drove them away with clubs and stones. Some turned back, trying to return home through the mountains. Few made it. The Alps that had been hard to cross going south became impossible going north as autumn approached and the first snows fell. Nicholas led a portion of his group all the way to Rome. He believed the Pope would bless them. He believed the Pope would give them ships. But when they reached the great city, the Pope told them to go home. There would be no crusade. There would be no miracle. Just go home. But there were no homes to return to. The journey had taken months. Winter was coming. Most of the children had no money, no food, no protection. They scattered across Italy. Some found work as servants. Some begged in the streets. Some simply disappeared into the crowds of the poor and the lost, becoming one more forgotten face in a world that had no place for them. Nicholas himself tried to return to Germany. When he finally reached his village, The people there were not grateful that he had survived. They were furious. He had taken their children away. He had promised miracles, and delivered only death. According to some accounts, his own father was hanged for allowing the crusade to begin. In the years that followed, the children's crusade became a ghost story, a warning, a stain on the conscience of Europe. Chroniclers wrote about it in confused terms, uncertain whether it had been a movement of faith or a movement of madness. The church tried to forget it had ever blessed the marches. Kings and nobles never spoke of it, but the villages remembered. There were homes with empty beds. There were mothers who set places at tables for children who would never return. There were fathers who went to their graves not knowing whether their sons and daughters had drowned, or been sold, or had died of cold in a mountain pass. The question that haunts us across the centuries is simple. Why did this happen? How could thousands of children be allowed to walk away into oblivion? How could parents let them go? How could the church permit it? How could merchants profit from it? The answer lies in the world they lived in. A world soaked in religious feelings so intense that it burned away common sense. A world where the voice of God seemed to speak through anyone, even a shepherd boy in a field. A world where miracles were expected daily, and skepticism was seen as a sin. The adults who watched the children march believed, or wanted to believe, that something holy was happening. They had been taught their whole lives that faith could move mountains, that the pure in heart would inherit the earth, that children were blessed above all others. So when children said God had called them, who were the adults to say no? And perhaps, beneath the faith and the fever, there was something darker. Perhaps some of those parents were relieved. Another mouth to feed gone. Another dowry saved. Another worker who would not need land or inheritance. Perhaps it was easier to believe in a miracle than to face the grinding poverty and hopelessness of their own lives. The merchants who betrayed the children were not unusual men. They were businessmen who saw an opportunity. A harbor full of desperate young people with no plan and no resources. A ready market for slaves across the sea. The transaction was simple. The profit was enormous. What happened to the children after the sale was not their concern. This is what makes the children's crusade so dark. It was not a single act of evil. It was a system of evil. A web of faith and greed and desperation that caught thousands of innocent lives and squeezed until there was nothing left. The children believed in something beautiful. They believed God loved them. They believed their innocence made them special. They believed the world worked according to stories where the pure of heart always won. They were wrong about all of it, and the price of being wrong was everything. Some historians now question whether the children's crusade happened exactly as the chronicles describe. The sources are old and contradictory. Some suggest the marchers were not all children but included many poor adults. Some argue the numbers were smaller than reported. Some think the whole story grew in the telling, a kernel of truth wrapped in layers of legend. But even if we strip away the exaggeration, even if we cut the numbers in half or more, the core remains. Young people marched away from their homes believing in a miracle. They were betrayed, abandoned, sold, and destroyed. Whether it was 5,000 or 50,000 does not change the weight of what was lost. This happened because people believed beautiful lies more than hard truths. It happened because children trusted the adults who should have protected them. It happened because faith without wisdom is not virtue, but vulnerability. It happened because the world has always been full of those who will exploit innocence for profit. In the villages the children left behind, life went on. Crops were planted and harvested. Babies were born. Seasons turned. But the empty spaces remained. The unfinished conversations. The unanswered questions. The grief that has no grave to visit. Some of those children might have lived long lives in slavery. Some might have adapted, learned new languages, found ways to survive in foreign lands. But they would have done so as property, as objects, stripped of the freedom they had walked away to find. Their belief in miracles transformed into the daily reality of chains. The Children's Crusade stands as a monument to the danger of certainty, to the harm that can be done by those who believe they cannot be wrong, to the suffering that follows when faith replaces thought. It stands as a reminder that children need protection, not just from physical danger, but from the dangerous ideas that adults create and spread. That innocence is not armor, that belief is not magic, that the world does not bend to the will of the pure-hearted simply because their hearts are pure. It stands as testimony to all the lost ones, all those whose names we do not know, all those who walked singing into the distance and were swallowed by silence. The shepherd boy Stephen, who started it all in France, disappeared from history as completely as the children who followed him. We do not know if he was on one of the ships that sank. We do not know if he was sold. We do not know if he lived long enough to understand what he had done. Nicholas, the German boy, may have returned home only to see his father die for his sins. Or this too might be legend, a story told to give some shape to senseless tragedy. What we know for certain is this: in the year 1212, the roads of Europe filled with children walking toward the sea. By the year 1213, those roads were empty again, and the children were gone. They are gone still, gone into the water, gone into the desert, gone into the unmarked graves of mountain passes, gone into slavery, gone into the blank spaces where history loses track of the powerless and the small. We cannot bring them back. We cannot undo what was done. We can only remember. We can only bear witness to the fact that it happened, that the world allowed it to happen, that faith and greed and desperation combined to create a catastrophe of innocence. The Children's Crusade asks us a question across 800 years of silence. It asks what we are willing to believe. It asks what we are willing to allow. It asks who we choose to protect and who we choose to abandon. It asks if we have learned anything at all. The answer lies not in the past, but in the present. In every moment when we must choose between comfortable belief and difficult truth. In every moment when we must decide whether to protect the vulnerable or exploit them. In every moment when we must ask if the stories we tell ourselves are stories of wisdom, or stories that lead the innocent into darkness. The children who marched to the sea in 1212 believed in miracles. They walked into the light of their faith, and found only shadow. Their voices, singing hymns as the ships left harbor, were the last sounds many of them would ever freely make. Those voices are silent now. The waves that carried them away have crashed on shores for 8 centuries since. The world has turned and turned again. But the darkness of what happened remains. A stain that will not wash clean. A wound that will not heal. A debt that can never be repaid. This is the story of the Children's Crusade. The darkest event in history. A moment when innocence walked willingly toward its own destruction, and the world stood by, and watched, and profited, and forgot, until only the silence remained to mark where thousands of young lives had been.